Welcome back, Nightmare Hunters. And if you're new here, a huge welcome to the HOA Nightmare Files, your ultimate destination for jaw-dropping true stories of HOA overreach and the epic battles against it. Before we dive into today's unbelievable tale, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And while you're down there, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you're always the first to find out when our latest HOA nightmare hits the screen. All right, let's get into this video.
All right, gather round because I've got a story for you. It's one of those wild tales that starts with a scream and ends with justice. And believe me, you won't believe it until you hear it. It all began with this ear-splitting shriek from a woman named Brenda. "Arrest him now! This is an HOA office, not a cattle barn!" she bellowed into her phone. I was standing right there in what she proudly called her headquarters, holding this old, crinkly piece of paper that was about to blow her whole world to smithereens. Two police officers showed up in a flash after her frantic 911 call, demanding I drop my ownership certificate and clear out. They figured it was just another petty neighborhood squabble, probably over a rogue garden gnome or something. But Brenda? Oh, Brenda had no clue she'd just hit the self-destruct button on her own carefully constructed life. Give me 5 minutes, I thought, watching them smirk. In 5 minutes, I was going to drop a bombshell nobody saw coming. That dusty old document proved that not just this fancy HOA office, but Brenda's entire $3 million horse ranch and her seemingly perfect existence were sitting smack dab on land that had belonged to my family for 127 years. Yeah, you heard that right. My family. You're watching HOA Nightmare Files, and trust me, this is only the beginning. That morning started out pretty typical for our sleepy Georgia town. I was elbow deep in a broken-down Harley in my little repair shop, just trying to get through the day. For 3 years, I'd been living in the shadow of Pine Ridge Estates, watching those HOA folks parade around in their designer clothes and luxury SUVs. Never once did I imagine that the very ground beneath their swanky office building held the key to my family's forgotten past. My grandpa, Woodrow, used to spin these tales about vast family lands where cattle roamed and wildflowers bloomed. I always just brushed them off as an old man's nostalgic ramblings, probably a bit senile. Until, that is, I found this hidden metal lockbox tucked away beneath some loose floorboards in his workshop. That little box, it held the power to absolutely devastate Brenda Smith's meticulously crafted world. Walking into that HOA office felt totally surreal, like I was stepping into enemy territory, armed with nothing but the truth and a piece of paper that looked older than dirt. The building itself was a monument to suburban excess, gleaming marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than I made in a year, and floor-to-ceiling windows that practically screamed, "We're better than you." Brenda was perched behind her massive mahogany desk, looking every bit the queen on her throne. Her perfectly styled blonde hair seemed to catch every ray of morning light, and her diamond wedding ring sparkled as she waved dismissively at a stack of violation notices, ready to unleash them on some poor soul who dared to plant the wrong shade of petunias. She finally looked up as I entered, her blue eyes instantly narrowing with that familiar disdain she reserved for anyone she deemed beneath her. "Excuse me, this is a private office. If you have a complaint about HOA fees, you need to schedule an appointment like everyone else." I could practically see her hand reaching for her phone, no doubt to summon security or the police, assuming I was just another frustrated homeowner who couldn't keep up with the Pine Ridge Estates lifestyle. The irony of it all was just delicious. Here she sat in her stolen castle, about to call the cops on the actual owner of the land she was sitting on. I carefully unfolded the ownership certificate. It was so brittle from decades of Georgia sunshine, it felt like autumn leaves, and held it up for her to see the official seal. It was stamped there back when her great-grandpa probably was still in diapers. "Brenda, I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, my voice surprisingly calm despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "You see, I'm not here to complain about HOA fees. I'm here because this building, your entire office, is sitting on land that belongs to me." The color drained from her face faster than water down a broken drain, though she quickly snapped back, her practiced smile firmly in place. "That's ridiculous," she scoffed, but I caught a nervous edge in her voice. "We've owned this property for 15 years. We have all the proper documentation." She went ahead and made the call that would seal her fate, dialing 911 with fingers that trembled just a little. Her eyes were locked on mine, like she was daring me to back down. Officer Marshall, a stocky guy in his 30s with kind eyes and the weary patience of someone who'd seen his share of HOA drama, was the first to arrive. His younger, more skeptical partner, Officer Cooper, probably figured it was just another boring neighborhood dispute. "Sir, we'll need you to explain the situation," he said, his hand casually resting on his belt, a classic cop gesture that screamed, "I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm ready." I handed him the ownership certificate, watching his expression shift as he scrutinized the official seals and then looked around the building. "Ma'am, explanation." But her eyes betrayed her. She knew there was nothing simple about this, nothing that legal jargon or HOA procedures could explain away. The foundation beneath her feet was older than her claims, older than her authority, older than the entire lie she'd built her small empire on. And that was just the beginning. The paper in my hand held more than just ownership of this building. It held the power to unravel everything she had so diligently worked to control. As Officer Marshall continued poring over the documents and Cooper snapped photos of the foundation, a strange mix of vindication and sadness washed over me. Vindication, because after 6 months of digging and doubting, I finally had proof that my grandfather's stories weren't just the ramblings of an old man lost in his memories. Sadness, because I realized Woodrow had probably known what happened to his land, probably watched helplessly as strangers built their dreams on the bones of his legacy. But there was something else in that ownership certificate, something I hadn't revealed yet, something that would make Brenda's current predicament seem like a minor inconvenience. The silence in the HOA office was deafening as I reached into my worn leather jacket and pulled out something that would change everything. It wasn't another paper or legal document. Instead, I placed an old cassette recorder on her pristine mahogany desk, the kind my grandfather used to dictate his daily thoughts, back when technology was simpler and truth was harder to manipulate. "Before we go any further," I said, watching Brenda's eyes widen with a mix of curiosity and dread, "I think everyone needs to hear what my grandfather recorded 3 weeks before he died." Officer Marshall leaned forward, his professional interest piqued, while Cooper kept photographing the foundation, but it was Brenda's reaction that truly told the story. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped the edge of her desk so tightly that her knuckles turned white. And for the first time since I'd walked into her kingdom, she looked genuinely terrified. I pressed play, and my grandfather Woodrow's voice filled the room, like a ghost returning to settle unfinished business. His words were weak and trembling, the voice of a man who knew his time was short, but had something crucial to say. "Jake, if you're listening to this, it means I'm gone and you found the lockbox like I hoped you would. There's something I need you to know about that Brenda woman who keeps coming around here with her sweet smiles and her poisoned gifts." The tape crackled with age, but every word was crystal clear, carrying the weight of a dying man's final testimony. "Every time that woman comes by with her baked goods," Woodrow's voice rasped from the speaker, "I feel sicker and weaker, like something's eating away at me from the inside. She always stays just long enough to ask about the property papers, about whether I've talked to any lawyers, about what's going to happen to the land when I'm gone. Mark my words, Jake. That woman knows exactly what she's doing, and she's not going to stop until she gets what she wants." At this, Ethel Geddes, the elderly secretary who had been silently observing the whole time, suddenly stood up, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "I can't do this anymore," she declared, her voice trembling. "I've been keeping quiet for 20 years, but I can't listen to that dear man's voice and stay silent any longer." Brenda whirled to face her, eyes blazing, but Ethel had crossed an invisible line. She threatened to fire me if I ever told anyone what I knew about the land deals, Ethel continued, pulling a key from her pocket and approaching a previously unnoticed filing cabinet. Brenda Smith has known from day one that this land didn't belong to the HOA, and she's been covering it up for 2 decades. The filing cabinet screeched open, a sound that echoed like justice finally breaking free. Ethel pulled out a thick manila folder, her hands trembling, as she placed it on Brenda's desk beside the cassette player. "These are copies of the original land surveys from 1987, she explained, opening the folder to reveal official-looking maps and legal documents. Right here you can see Brenda's signature acknowledging that she was informed about the disputed ownership of this property. Officer Marshall moved closer, and I watched Brenda's last hope crumble. Her handwriting, in black and white, confirmed she'd known all along about the Johnson family's legitimate claims. But the real bombshell dropped when Ethel flipped to the next page. This building wasn't just constructed on Johnson land, she said, pointing to an architectural drawing of my grandfather's property. The HOA office was built directly on top of the foundation of Woodrow Johnson's family home, using his basement and foundation walls as the base for their new construction. The implications hit me hard. This wasn't just about land ownership, it was about desecration, a monument to suburban greed built directly on my family's buried history. Brenda finally found her voice, desperate and shrill. "This is all fabricated evidence," she cried, reaching for her phone. "I'm going to post on social media right now and let everyone know that we're dealing with a con artist trying to steal property from hard-working families." She began typing frantically, probably crafting some elaborate victim narrative. But I wasn't going to let her control the story. "Go ahead and post away, Brenda," I said, pulling out my own phone and hitting record, because I'm about to share this cassette recording with everyone who follows your social media accounts, along with copies of all these documents showing your signature acknowledging the property dispute. Color drained from her face. Her social media strategy had just turned into a double-edged sword, and she just caught herself. Officer Marshall was already on his radio, calling for backup and requesting someone from the district attorney's office to come down. This was clearly escalating into a major criminal investigation involving multiple agencies and potentially dozens of victims. This is going to require a full forensic audit of all property transactions in this area going back at least 15 years, he informed us as Brenda sank back into her chair, looking like a woman who had just watched her entire world crumble in real time. The irony wasn't lost on me. She sat in an office built on the bones of my family's homestead, surrounded by evidence of her crimes, probably calculating whether she had enough hidden money to disappear before the full weight of the law came crashing down on her perfectly manicured head. As I looked around the room, at the scattered documents, the photographic evidence, and that old cassette player still sitting on Brenda's desk like a technological ghost from the past, I realized we had only just scratched the surface of her criminal enterprise. The $3 million ranch was impressive, but if she had been selling Johnson land for over a decade, there had to be other properties, other victims, other families who genuinely believed they had purchased their piece of the American dream from a woman who sold them stolen goods with a smile and a handshake. I'm Mike, and I'm the scriptwriter for the HOA Nightmare Files channel. I'm currently living in the UK, and I'm really hoping you viewers can give me some feedback in the comments below to make the upcoming stories even more engaging. The tension in that HOA office reached its absolute breaking point when Brenda suddenly did something that caught everyone completely off guard, something that would transform this property dispute into a full-blown murder investigation faster than you could say criminal confession. Officer Marshall had just finished calling for backup when Brenda arose from her chair, a wild, desperate look in her eyes, the kind you see on a cornered animal that knows it has nothing left to lose. "You want the truth?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the marble walls like a banshee's wail that I swear will haunt my dreams for years. "Fine. I'll give you the goddamn truth about that stubborn old bastard who refused to just die quietly like he was supposed to." The words just poured out of her mouth like poison from a broken dam, each confession more damning than the last, while Officer Cooper fumbled for his recording device to capture every self-incriminating syllable. Woodrow Johnson was the most pig-headed, obstinate man I ever had the misfortune to deal with. All I wanted was for him to sign a simple piece of paper transferring ownership of that worthless piece of dirt to the HOA so we could move forward with development plans. But no, he had to be difficult about everything. Her voice cracked with a mixture of rage and hysteria as she gestured wildly, completely oblivious to the fact that she was confessing to attempted murder in front of 2 police officers and multiple witnesses. Those sleeping pills I ground up and mixed into the cookie frosting should have just made him drowsy enough to sign whatever I put in front of him. But the old fool's constitution was stronger than I expected. The silence that followed her confession was so absolute you could have heard a pin drop from across town. But it was my own emotional reaction that surprised me most. Instead of the anger I expected to feel, I was overwhelmed by a crushing wave of grief that brought me to my knees right there on the cold marble floor. My grandfather hadn't just died from natural causes or even accidental poisoning. He'd been slowly murdered by a woman who saw his life as nothing more than an inconvenience standing between her and a real estate deal. The weight of that realization hit me like a physical blow, and I found myself clutching his old pocket watch so tightly that the metal edges cut into my palm, drawing blood that felt appropriate for this moment of terrible revelation. Through my grief, I could still hear John's voice coming through the phone speaker, but now he was talking to Officer Marshall about medical evidence and toxicology reports that would prove Brenda's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. He said, "I spoke with Dr. Janice Johnson at Georgia General this morning. She was Woodrow Johnson's physician for the last 20 years of his life, and she saved blood samples from his final visit because she was suspicious about his rapid decline. The medical evidence was damning enough to support criminal charges, with blood work showing levels of sedatives that were consistent with long-term poisoning rather than any prescribed medication regimen. But Brenda wasn't finished destroying herself with her own words because apparently confession was like a drug she couldn't stop taking once she'd started. The pathetic part is that I didn't even need him to die," she said, laughing with the kind of bitter hysteria that sends chills down your spine. "I just needed him weak enough and confused enough to sign documents that would make the property transfer look legitimate. But he kept fighting the medication and asking too many questions about what he was signing." She turned to face me directly, her eyes blazing with a mixture of guilt and defiance that made her look like a completely different person from the polished HOA president I'd encountered just hours earlier. "Your precious grandfather could have lived for years if he had just cooperated with a simple business transaction. But his stubborn pride killed him just as surely as those sleeping pills did." Officer Marshall had heard enough confessions for one day and moved to place Brenda under arrest. But she had one more revelation that would complicate this case beyond anything we had imagined so far. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Jake?" she said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her purse with trembling hands that betrayed her attempt at appearing calm and collected. "Well, here's something your fancy lawyer friend probably didn't tell you about during his big phone call."
Jake, ask her where she got that document and when it was supposedly filed with the federal government, he said, his tone suggesting he already suspected what we were about to discover. Brenda's confident smirk faltered slightly as she realized that her last desperate gambit might not be as foolproof as she'd hoped. But she pressed forward anyway with the determination of someone who'd already lost everything and had nothing left to lose. This was filed with the Environmental Protection Agency 6 months ago, which means any claims you have on the property are superseded by federal environmental law. But Officer Cooper had been examining the document while she spoke, and what he found there would be the final nail in the coffin of Brenda Smith's criminal enterprise. Ma'am, this document bears the signature of EPA Administrator who retired 5 years ago. So, it all started outside that HOA office in Pine Ridge Estates, a place where deception had pretty much been the main attraction. There I was, Jake Johnson, my hands shaking, revealing this shocking truth. My grandfather had been murdered by the HOA president, Brenda Smith, who'd been systematically stealing our family land for over a century. What happened next wasn't the anger I expected, but this incredible outpouring of support, thoughtful advice, offers of legal help, and a real sense of community. Suggestions flooded in, a GoFundMe, legal help, and suggestions for restitution for the victims. Within 20 minutes, my live stream had over 50,000 viewers, and it turned into this amazing brainstorming session for restorative justice. It really ignited a spark of hope. The real turning point came when John Morrison joined the stream with monumental news. Federal investigators had actually uncovered Brenda's offshore accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, holding over $4 million she'd stolen from property sales over 15 years. The chat absolutely exploded. This wasn't just land theft, it was a massive fraud scheme. The recovered funds could now either help relocate the affected families or help them legitimately buy their homes. This incredible mix of social media and legal expertise achieved what traditional courts couldn't have done in months. Within hours, 3 law firms volunteered their services pro bono, a real estate company offered property transfers at cost, and a crowdfunding campaign raised over $200,000 for families facing financial hardship. John Morrison explained the proposed solution. I would lease the land back to the current residents at reasonable rates, and Brenda's recovered assets would be used to establish a community land trust, safeguarding everyone's interests. The irony was profound. Brenda's attempt to destroy community trust had, completely by accident, brought the neighborhood closer than ever. Families who were once strangers now worked together, sharing resources and navigating the complex legal situation. Mrs. Henderson organized a meal train, while the teenagers launched a social media campaign to keep everyone informed. Maria Santos, a single mother who had been terrified of losing her home, put it perfectly. This is what community looks like, not the fake HOA version that Brenda was trying to force on us, but real people taking care of each other when things get difficult. As the sun set, I stood in the same spot, but everything had transformed. Brenda Smith was in county jail, facing decades for murder, fraud, and conspiracy. My grandfather's land was restored, becoming the foundation for a stronger, more united community. The pocket watch in my hand felt lighter, as if Woodrow's spirit had finally found peace, knowing his death had led to true justice and healing.